I came home from work today and I sat down and I watched the finale of The Boys, one of the most anticipated finales in recent years. And I gotta say, I have some thoughts about it. Now, before I get into this, I just want to say that I think that The Boys is one of the best TV shows that I've ever watched, hands down. Nothing comes close to its satirical depiction of superheroes, political satire. The writing, cinematography, and acting is just so much better than most other shows that I've seen. That said, I do think that this season had a lot of shortcomings, especially when compared to its predecessors. I just think that there was a lot of plot inconsistencies. The pacing in this season was very strange. And most importantly, the finale just felt off. But I want to break this down one by one. Now, if you were anything like me, I'm sure that you finished episode 7 and you probably were questioning how they were going to finish so many open, loose threads and storylines in one episode. And one episode that was 65 minutes. I just had a bad feeling from the get-go because I knew that fitting everything into an episode that short, especially with all of the open plot lines, was just going to be extremely hard to pull off without it feeling rushed. Now, to give you a little bit of perspective, I just want to remind you of all of the storylines that had to come to an end as part of this episode. So here's just a few. Butcher, Huey, Starlight, Kimiko, MM, Ryan, Sage, Ashley, Homelander, Deep, Soldier Boy. Like, there was just no way to wrap that up in 65 minutes in a way that just didn't feel rushed. I don't really know what to say beyond that. I feel like, I've heard rumors that the last episode was supposed to be like an hour and a half or something, and I feel like that would have been a lot better, in terms of fleshing out these scenes more and wrapping up everybody's stories in a way that was more cohesive and had more narrative. The fact that they stuck with 65 minutes is just a little mind-boggling to me. So I just want to get that out of the way. Now, the second thing that I want to talk about is Soldier Boy. Now, I'm sure that if you're a fan of The Boys, you're probably aware of Vought Rising, which is going to be the prequel set in the 1900s following the story of Soldier Boy in the early days of Vought. While I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, I just want to remind you that Soldier Boy got choked out in the penultimate episode of the series. He's back on ice for the 3rd time in a row, and coincidentally, they're setting up a new show with him as the front runner. But I don't think it's just going to be a prequel. I think we're going to see him after the events of The Boys. Now, that Homelander is dead, Butcher is dead, and Vought's future is essentially on the line. I think this is going to be something kind of like a Better Call Saul situation that we saw, where the main series wraps up, but then they make this prequel, but there's also glimpses of what happens after the main show. The only difference that I see is that the way that Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul did it was that Breaking Bad was able to wrap up without the need for Better Call Saul. Like, it's one cohesive story that doesn't feel like it's building onto another. And they did it brilliantly because in Better Call Saul, obviously we follow the story of Saul Goodman and we see glimpses of what happens after the events of Breaking Bad. But Breaking Bad never set up Better Call Saul really in any way. And I think The Boys did it the opposite way, where everything in Vought Rising, and I'm assuming whenever Soldier Boy returns, because he's on ice again, that The Boys essentially used this as a plot line to bring him back in the future of the universe. I don't know, it just makes the main story of The Boys seem much more like a setup rather than a narrative ending cohesively, and I think it would have just been nice to have The Boys wrap up in a way that didn't seem like it was just building up another story and essentially cheapened. Moving on to the next part, the shock value. I know that The Boys has always been a very shock value centric show. It's very grotesque, and that's why a lot of people like it, because it's just so unhinged at times, and that's what gave it its edge. But I feel like in the last season, right, when you're trying to tie up everybody's stories, you probably shouldn't be spending so much time on these gag reels, these essentially bloopers, when all of these characters have stories to finish. It just didn't really carry the same weight that it did in the earlier seasons. That's just a personal opinion, and opinion alert. Another point, Gen V didn't seem to matter at all. You mean to tell me that there was 2 seasons of this spin-off show that introduced so many of these characters and we barely get a glimpse of them. And they're essentially brushed off and just told to go to Canada. I don't understand how that, I don't understand how that made that through the writer's room. Like, why do them like that? And I remember there was so much hype about the universes being, you know, intertwined with each other, but the payoff just seemed to suck. Speaking of things that didn't matter, why was Soldier Boy suddenly so inclined to do what quote unquote Clara wanted? If I recall correctly, and I think you can recall correctly, he was in a relationship with Crimson Countess. I want to remind you that Soldier Boy gave Homelander the V1 for seemingly no reason. He said it's what Clara would have wanted. I've seen so many memes about it's what Clara would have wanted or something along those lines. And I think the memes are valid. It doesn't really make any sense. Dude has been around the whole world and he wants to hyperfixate on this one person and use that to justify giving V1 to Homelander, which, by the way, he fucking hated in all of the episodes leading up to that. It just seems like very strange, inconsistent writing, and I don't really know what to make of it. Anyway, I just wanted to share my thoughts on this for a few minutes, so feel free to agree, disagree, do whatever your heart desires. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought, and if I'm missing context or you want to defend the writing, please do, because I think I need some new perspective here if that is the case. Thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.
Yummers.